What if December 21st, 2012 wasn't just another day? Most of us remember the buildup. For years, television programs, websites, documentaries, and conspiracy forums talked about one date, December 21st, 2012. According to the popular story, an ancient Mayan calendar was supposedly counting down towards something. Some said catastrophe, some said transformation, some said the end of an age, and some simply said the end of the world. Then the date arrived, and apparently nothing happened. The sun came up, people went to work, Christmas came a few days later. The world continued, and eventually 2012 became another failed apocalypse prediction. At least, that's the conventional story. Because in the years that followed, another theory began circulating. A much stranger theory. What if something actually did happen? What if the world we remember before 2012 isn't exactly the same world we're living in now? And what if experiments involving the world's largest particle accelerator somehow played a role? That's where CERN enters the story. And once you combine CERN, the Mandela Effect, theoretical physics, and one extremely strange prophecy from the book of Daniel, you arrive at a question that sounds like science fiction. Did mankind somehow tamper with time itself? And if it did, could that have anything to do with Daniel's warning that a future power would think to change times and laws? Today we're going to investigate it, not assume it. Not preach internet rumors as established fact. We're going to separate what we know from what people claim, and then we're going directly to the King James Bible to determine what the scripture actually says.
Every day, you're told what to think. Headlines race across your screen. Narratives are written. Questions are discouraged. While others follow the narrative, one voice refuses to. Unshaken, unfiltered, unapologetic. I'm Rocky Smith, and this is Rock Solid TV.
The year the world was supposed to end. To understand this theory, we have to return to 2012. The idea that the world would end on December 21st became one of the biggest apocalyptic stories of the early internet era. Movies were made about it, television specials discussed it, books were written about it, and millions of people heard some variation of the same claim. The Mayan calendar ends on December 21st, 2012. Therefore, something enormous is going to happen. But there was a major problem. The Maya weren't simply predicting that Earth would explode when the calendar reached that date. The date corresponded with the completion of a major cycle in the Maya long count calendar. Think about what happens when December 31st becomes January 1st. The calendar reaches its end, but time doesn't. One cycle ends, another begins. That distinction matters because our investigation falls apart immediately if we begin with something that isn't true. There is no established evidence that the ancient Maya predicted that planet Earth would physically cease to exist on December 21st, 2012. But culturally, 2012 became associated with the end of the world anyway. And while millions of people were watching the calendar, scientists in Europe were conducting some of the most extraordinary experiments mankind had ever attempted. Enter CERN is the European Organization for Nuclear Research. Located near Geneva, along the border between Switzerland and France, CERN operates the Large Hadron Collider. The LHC is enormous. It consists of a roughly 27-kilometer or about 17-mile ring buried underground. Inside that machine, particles are accelerated to extraordinary speeds and collided. Scientists analyze what emerges from those collisions in an attempt to understand some of the most fundamental components of reality. And in 2012, CERN made history. On July 4th, scientists announced the discovery of a new particle consistent with the long-sought Higgs boson. This was a monumental achievement in particle physics. And because the Higgs field is associated with how elementary particles acquire mass, popular media quickly attached a dramatic nickname to the Higgs boson, the God particle. Physicists generally weren't claiming that they had discovered God, but you can probably understand why that terminology captured people's imaginations. A gigantic machine buried beneath Europe, smashing particles together, investigating the fundamental structure of reality, discovering something nicknamed the God particle. During the same year, popular culture had spent years calling the end of the world. That's an almost perfect recipe for conspiracy theories, but then something else happened. People began noticing things, or at least they believed they were noticing things. The Mandela Effect. Have you ever remembered something clearly, only to discover that apparently it never happened that way? A logo, a movie quote, a brand name, a historical event, a spelling. Sometimes thousands or even millions of people claim to remember the same incorrect version. This phenomenon became known as the Mandela Effect. The term came from people who remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison decades before his actual death in 2013. Obviously, Mandela did not die in prison. He was released in 1990. He became president of South Africa, and he died in 2013. Yet some people insist they distinctly remember news coverage of his death years earlier. Other examples eventually became internet legends. People remembering different versions of corporate logos, different spellings of familiar products, different lines from movies, different details from childhood. The conventional explanation is straightforward. Human memory isn't a video recorder. Memory can be reconstructed. We confuse similar information. We absorb incorrect versions through popular culture. Groups of people can make the same mistake because their brains are exposed to the same patterns. And that's important. The existence of shared false memories does not prove that history changed. But some people proposed a much more radical explanation. They asked, what if our memories aren't wrong? What if reality changed? What if some of us remember another version because somehow we experienced another version? And eventually CERN became attached to the theory. Did CERN shift us into another reality? This is where documented science ends and speculation begins. There is currently no established scientific evidence demonstrating that CERN moved humanity into another timeline. There is no verified experiment showing that the Large Hadron Collider rewrote historical events. There is no confirmed evidence that we died in 2012 and somehow woke up in another universe. Those claims should not be presented as facts. But we can still ask why people find the theory compelling. Modern physics contains concepts that sound almost unbelievable to anyone unfamiliar with the field. Quantum mechanics, antimatter, quantum fields, black holes, extra dimensions in some theoretical models. And different interpretations of quantum mechanics have even generated serious philosophical discussions involving multiple possible worlds. But here's where we have to be extremely careful. The fact that scientists mathematically discuss something does not mean CERN possesses a machine capable of transporting civilization between alternate Earths. Those are completely different claims. Possible in a mathematical model does not mean technologically achievable. Theoretical does not mean demonstrated, and unexplained does not automatically mean supernatural. But now we arrive at the reason I wanted to investigate this subject in the first place. Because long before CERN existed, long before particle accelerators existed, long before anyone talked about the Mandela Effect, the prophet Daniel wrote something extremely peculiar. Think to change times. Open your King James Bible to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel is describing an extraordinary prophetic vision involving kingdoms, rulers, persecution, judgment, and ultimately God's kingdom. Listen carefully to Daniel 7:23 through 27. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Daniel doesn't say CERN. He doesn't say particle accelerator. He doesn't say Mandela Effect. He doesn't say 2012. And anybody telling you those things are explicitly written into Daniel 7 is adding something to the text. But Daniel does say something remarkable. This coming power will think to change times and laws. What exactly does that mean? What does times actually mean? There are several interpretations. One interpretation connects times with appointed religious times, sacred observances, festivals, calendrical systems, and established religious order. Another interpretation understands the expression more broadly as an attempt to alter established political, religious, and social order. But there's another passage in Daniel that makes this especially interesting. Daniel chapter 2. Listen to Daniel 2:20 through 22. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him." Did you catch it? Daniel chapter 2 says God changes the times and seasons. Daniel chapter 7 describes another power that will think to change times and laws. That contrast deserves attention, because perhaps the issue isn't merely clocks, perhaps it isn't merely calendars, perhaps the central issue is authority. God determines history, God raises kingdoms, God removes kingdoms, God controls the ultimate course of events. Then Daniel describes an earthly power behaving as though it possesses authority over things belonging to God. That's much deeper than changing the date printed on a calendar. It is the attempted seizure of divine authority. Could technology be involved? Now we can finally ask our question fairly. Could future technology somehow fulfill Daniel 7:25? Potentially. Scripture doesn't tell us what technology will or will not exist when these events unfold. But that's very different from saying CERN already fulfilled the prophecy. Suppose mankind eventually developed technology capable of manipulating our experience of time. Would that be interesting in light of Daniel? Absolutely. Suppose governments attempted to redefine calendars, religious observances, law, history, or the established order. Could that be relevant? Possibly. But we cannot reverse engineer prophecy around every strange technological development. Otherwise, whatever happens tomorrow automatically becomes something supposedly predicted by whichever verse sounds closest. That's not biblical interpretation. That's confirmation bias. We have to allow Scripture to define Scripture. And Daniel gives us identifying characteristics. The power described in Daniel 7 doesn't merely tamper with times. He speaks against the Most High. He persecutes the saints, he exercises political authority, he changes times and laws, and his dominion eventually encounters divine judgment. Any proposed fulfillment has to deal with the whole description, not just four convenient words. But why does everything feel different? This might actually be the most interesting part of the entire discussion. Talk to enough people and you'll eventually hear someone say, "The world hasn't felt the same since around 2012. Some point to smartphones, others point to social media, others point to political polarization, others mention artificial intelligence, surveillance, algorithms, economic instability, cultural upheaval, the Mandela Effect, and some simply say, time itself feels faster. But there's another explanation worth considering. Maybe we didn't enter another timeline. Maybe civilization underwent one of the fastest technological transformations in human history. Think about what happened during roughly the decade surrounding 2012. Smartphones became ubiquitous. Social media became deeply integrated into everyday life. Algorithms increasingly determined what information people encountered. News became nearly instantaneous. Entertainment became permanently available. People began carrying internet-connected computers everywhere they went. The boundary between online life and physical life began disappearing. So perhaps reality didn't change. Perhaps our interface with reality changed. And when your environment changes dramatically enough, the past can genuinely feel like another world. That explanation isn't as exciting as a dimensional portal, but sometimes the boring explanation has better evidence. What about 2012? Now return to the original theory. The world was supposedly going to end in 2012. CERN somehow prevented it. Humanity was shifted onto another timeline. Mandela effects are remnants of memories from the original timeline, And Daniel predicted it when he said someone would think to change times. An incredible story. But when we examine each link, the evidence weakens. The ancient Maya did not clearly predict Earth's destruction in 2012. CERN did conduct historic experiments around that period. The Higgs boson discovery was announced in 2012. The Mandela Effect is a genuine term describing shared unusual memories. But there is no established evidence connecting CERN's experiments to those memories. And Daniel 7:25 does not identify CERN. So, should we throw the entire subject away? No, because there is still a legitimate question underneath all of this. How far will mankind eventually attempt to go? Playing God. Human beings have always pushed boundaries. We split the atom, we manipulate genes, we create artificial intelligence, we send machines beyond the solar system, we can modify embryos, we can synthesize biological material, we can create virtual worlds almost indistinguishable from recorded reality, and science will continue advancing. That isn't automatically evil. Knowledge itself isn't the enemy. But Scripture repeatedly warns about something else. Pride. The belief that mankind can ultimately become its own highest authority. That idea appears all the way back in Genesis. Genesis 11:4 says, "And they said, 'Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.'" The problem wasn't simply architecture, it was human ambition separated from submission to God. And Daniel 7 presents another arrogant power, one that speaks against the Most High, one that persecutes his people, one that attempts to impose its authority over times and laws. Maybe the warning isn't primarily about a machine, maybe it's about the mentality behind the machine. The belief that there is nothing mankind cannot control: nature, life, death, law, truth, and perhaps eventually even time. The most important word may be think. There's one word in Daniel 7:25 that I don't want you to overlook. Think. The Bible doesn't simply say he shall change times and laws. It says he shall think to change times and laws. That's an important distinction. Whatever this power attempts, he isn't ultimately sovereign. God is. And Daniel immediately shows us what happens next. Daniel 7:26 and 27. "But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." That's the part conspiracy theories often miss. Daniel isn't telling us that mankind successfully hacks God's universe. Daniel is telling us that a rebellious power becomes so arrogant that it attempts to exercise authority belonging to God. And then, God judges it. Did CERN change our timeline? So did CERN change our timeline? Based on the evidence currently available, we cannot responsibly say that it did. Could particle physics eventually reveal things about reality that completely transform our understanding of time? Certainly. Could future technologies challenge assumptions we currently take for granted? History suggests that's possible. Could Daniel 7:25 have implications extending beyond calendars and religious observances? That's a legitimate theological question. But does Daniel 7:25 prove CERN moved us into another timeline in 2012? No. The scripture doesn't give us enough information to make that claim, and neither does the scientific evidence. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe the question isn't, did CERN change time? Maybe it's, what happens when mankind believes it has gained the authority to control things that belong to God? Because Daniel's warning isn't ultimately about technology, it's about power, it's about rebellion. It's about a ruler who speaks against the Most High, persecutes God's people, and believes he can rewrite the established order itself. He shall think to change times and laws. Maybe someday we'll discover that those words involve something technological beyond anything Daniel himself could have described. Maybe they concern appointed religious times and divine law. Maybe they encompass political authority and an attempt to restructure the established order. But whatever the exact fulfillment, Daniel tells us something unequivocally. The one attempting to change everything doesn't win. God does. So investigate CERN, investigate the Mandela Effect, investigate 2012. Question the official explanation when the evidence warrants questioning it. But question the conspiracy explanation too. because replacing an unsupported official story with an unsupported alternative doesn't get us any closer to truth. As scripture says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. That's the standard, not fear, not headlines, not viral videos, evidence, scripture, truth. And I'll leave you with one question. If Daniel's prophecy really does describe a future power attempting to control things mankind was never meant to control, what would changing times and laws look like in a technological civilization like ours? Maybe that's a question worth watching. This is Rocky Smith with Rock Solid TV. Wake up, stand firm, stay rock solid.